What's going on, guys? What's going on, Randy? What up, Renee? What a boring day, I'm not gonna lie. Today was definitely one of those kind of days where it's like, did I really wake up to see this kind of market price action? Because it was pretty much abysmal. I think there was one point where I haven't seen that in chat for quite a while. Our chat was so quiet, I think we went almost about 2 hours without a message. That was literally how quiet it was. That was pretty wild. But it kind of seems like we had the calm before the storm. We had that inflation data pretty much coming towards us tomorrow. That's going to be something that's going to be on everyone's watch right now. So it kind of felt like since we had that little morning drop off, everything just felt like it's a little bit in a consolidation kind of phase here through much of the day. And tomorrow is going to be that big swing that we're going to likely end up getting on the back end of that inflation data here tomorrow morning. I expected a little bit more fireworks. I know that we had about three speakers today, Powell, Mester, Bullard today. I was expecting a little bit more of some better price action. I think we also had oil inventories early this morning as well, but this was not the slow kind of price action day that I was expecting particularly, but it just felt like the calm before the storm tomorrow, in which we are likely end up setting up for a big swing, whether that be north or south. So kind of getting into where we are sitting with SPY here, and I'll kind of get into some names that kind of just stood out to me, some formations that just stood out to me. Renz, what's going on? MO, please. I'll take a look at it. We'll see what's going on with MO for you. But let me drop right in real quick to SPY, kind of see what levels we're particularly looking at. We saw as of pretty much yesterday, we broke our uptrend yesterday. I kind of highlighted that repeatedly. We got the nice drop off. We didn't quite make it to my support level that I had at 378. We got close enough to about 378 half. We saw the nice little intraday reversal that we had towards the afternoon there. So where we're sitting at is right into my resistance of 381 half. What I'm going to be looking for is that next leg up. Maybe we possibly end up getting a nice little gap up going into inflation data tomorrow as we see spice kind of rebounding here after hours. We likely get somewhat of a gap up. I'll be looking for a move up towards that 384, 384 half, which is still sitting at that COVID low that we have. So we'll see if we end up testing that 384 half. Maybe that ends up being pretty much our hard resistance, in which inflation data is going to send us right back down. Otherwise, if we can break north again of that 384 half, I'm still targeting that other VWAP I have that's up towards close enough to 381, 391. It's at 390.84 to be exact. So I'll be watching for that on the back end of inflation data tomorrow, popping over 384.37, and then we could potentially make our way back up towards 391. That's what I'll be watching for. Otherwise, on the flip side, I would expect to get this small, slight gap up here by tomorrow morning into that inflation data. And if we're a bear, you're looking to pretty much reject that 384.7, and you want to take out today's low that we have of that 378 half. In which case, this may end up being a landslide towards 377. And if it's really much more of a waterfall like that, if inflation data is really that bad, then we could potentially see us crack that 377, which I would hopefully anticipate is going to hold here tomorrow. But if we can't hold 377, that's pretty much a landslide to me that we end up going down towards 372 half. And you're looking at probably almost about a double digit loss on SPY here tomorrow, potentially. So that's where it kind of feels a little bit like the calm before the storm, I say, because it looks like we're setting up for a big swing in price action on the back end of data tomorrow. All right. Before I get into some of the tickers, then I wanted to look at real quick. Let me see. Mr. Seriously, I'm expecting huge red days coming soon. You are not lying. I expect the same thing. This little boom, a little bear market rally that we've had for the past, I want to say 2 weeks more or less. It looks like it's going to be coming to an end. That rip that we had, just a strong reversal from 362 up to about 393, was just insanely crazy just how quickly we got there for that matter. If you actually look just between what June 23rd up until the 24th, that was literally a swing of 373 up to about 387, near 15-point swing on that, just within a matter of a day and a half, more you could say. That was a hell of a move, and that's usually what you typically see in bear market rallies. Quick, fast impulse ups, and then once you start to see that leg down, as you pretty much saw here dating back towards yesterday, it can be just a swift elevator style down. And that's likely what we're going to probably see here. If not towards the end of the week, going into next week. All right. Let me actually get into pretty much looking at MO for you, Renz, real quick, and then I'll kind of highlight some of the names that kind of just caught my attention towards the end of the day there. Let's see this. Wow, this is a disgusting little bear flag you have going on here, my guy. You have a nice little bear flag that's currently sitting. You're looking like you're gonna take out that low that you have from the 22nd, below this $41. Now, where do we particularly look at in terms of if we're going lower than that? Let's see if we can get out to the weekly. I just want to see a better image of this. That's a disgusting looking chart. Yeah, that's not pretty. I will say that it's not a particularly pretty chart right now. You see that you had this little ascending channel action just to give you pretty much a quick highlight. If you had this little ascending action that you particularly broke down off of, you can see probably going out towards this actually hits. Yeah, you can pretty much see you had that nice ascending channel action from that March 2020 low that you had, the COVID lows. You had that nice ascending channel action, but then you ended up breaking down here these past, I want to say roughly that was around June 13th that you broke down. Now, where I would expect to pretty much find somewhat of a demand zone will be right around this high 35 mark. I want to say close enough to 36. This is where you particularly would stand as your weekly demand zone right now. You would expect to find buyers stepping in around this $36 level. That's particularly where I would say if you're a buyer that you pretty much want to defend. If you can't defend 36, then obviously you're pretty much looking at taking out that COVID low in particular. But that would be where I would be targeting if I'm looking for that long term position, in which case I'm kind of playing a little bit of a devil's advocate here. Not knowing whether you want to play it short or long term, but if you're going long term, I think $36 level is where you're particularly looking at to go long, whether that be shares, leaps, whatever be the case. But if you're looking maybe more so for pretty much the quick buck out of this, the quick short term play out of this, then I would look to particularly hold right around this level, particularly. I would look to see if you end up holding that low, that 41 mark, because that's going to be particularly pretty much key. In which that was where you particularly had support or resistance between that entire little V-shaped recovery from COVID lows into your entire that full-on breakout that you had dating back towards February of last year. So that 41 level is going to be very critical if you can't hold it. So I would expect buyers to basically step in here to defend this low that you put in from June 21st. Otherwise, you take out that June 21st low, then that's where I say $36 level is where I would particularly look to go long, especially for the long term, for a better term of that. All right. So that's pretty much what I would look at for that one. Kind of getting backtrack. If you guys have any other takers, just drop them in the chat. But kind of getting into some of the names that actually stood out to me. NVIDIA was one of those that I kind of just wanted to highlight here. Kind of give you the if scenario of that, both directions. You do have a little bit of a megaphone action that's currently sitting, as you see on the larger degree here. But then you had a nice little bear pennant that was setting up towards the after hours here. And that's what I was particularly looking at. You see that you broke that little downtrend resistance for this bear pennant to pretty much invalidate and break north. So this is something that I'm going to particularly watch. You have the nice gap fill that's sitting over this 158 mark. It's about a near $2 gap fill that you're looking at towards 160. I'm going to look to see if we get a nice gap up to test the resistance. Not necessarily the resistance, but test the gap fill at that 158 mark. And then we will particularly see at the open if we can get a further push through the gap fill. And ultimately, I have resistance sitting at 161 half, which has basically been your support to resistance for the better half of this entire little megaphone action we've had. So 161 half is my overall resistance. I would expect a U-turn if we do get some kind of V-shaped bounce off of this basically as the bear pen has been invalidated. I'm going to look for that bounce, test the gap fill 158. We break 158, then I'm targeting 161 half. Otherwise, if this ends up turning out to be a fake out, breaking north of this bear pennant, I'm basically looking for a breakdown here below 153 half. And I'm going to potentially look for this gap fill that's sitting below in this red shaded area that targets 147. And just to give you the highlight of where I got that gap fill from, if I kind of push out towards the 4 hour, you see that gap fill that's sitting here dating back from May 20th of last year. All right. So that's where I particularly got that nice little gap fill from. But it's a nice little megaphone action. I want to say it's still a bearish trend overall on the video here, but I would look to see if we get any kind of relief, any kind of further bounce on the back end of that gap up that I'm kind of anticipating into data tomorrow. I'm going to look for 161.5 to be my overall resistance to take that next leg down further into the gap below. All right. So that's another one that kind of stood out to me. Kind of going across the board. Another one was Tesla. Of course, Tesla's usually always on the watch list for most of us in particular. You had that nice little ascending action I spoke about yesterday. You broke the uptrend trend line support basically. You had the nice little gap down in particular. You got about a quarter of the way from that gap fill that dating back towards towards June 21st. You got about halfway, maybe a quarter, you could say, and you had the nice little V-shaped bottom that took place. So I'm gonna look for a little bit more of a retracement back up. Let's see if we can basically retest our prior trendline support as a resistance, which would potentially put you up towards 708 as your resistance here on Tesla. So 708 would particularly be my resistance here. If we get a gap up, if we get any kind of rebound, any kind of reflexive move and continuation off of the bottom that we put in intraday here today, I'm going to look for 708 to be my resistance. And then we curl and basically reject that trendline resistance. And we end up coming right back down to get a completion of this gap fill below. All right. So that's when I'm going to continue to pretty much watch. Transitory looks like you were right about Tesla headed to 675. Looking like 655 range for demand. I'm not gonna lie, transitory. I actually have this testing this June 16th low of 626 rather quickly. I would not be surprised if it actually ends up heading that direction by the end of the week. So once we end up getting this continuation of whatever bounce is left on Tesla here to retest that prior uptrend that we had, I'm gonna watch for 708 to particularly be my short entry. And I think you're looking at about a near 70, 60, $70 move to the downside potentially towards the end of the week. That's just me saying that. Obviously, I don't want anyone taking on that kind of risk, trying to diamond hold that. But that's where I particularly look at. I think the biggest thing is knowing where the risk reward is, and that's at retesting this uptrend as a resistance that we broke down from at 708. That's particularly probably the biggest key part is 708, 709. That's where you particularly look to go short. And then you do your due diligence in basically taking your profits as you should. But I do have us retesting that low that's sitting at 626. And I think potentially we have a good shot to pretty much end up testing that by the end of the week. All right. So that's another one that was on my radar. Let me see what else kind of crossed my attention. I think I I have to say pretty much Microsoft. That was a hell of a relative strength that we had out of Microsoft. Throw Apple in that name as well pretty earlier on. I think most of us were expecting that downfall to pretty much escalate today. But once you started looking at Microsoft, you started looking at Apple, that relative strength right there was pretty noticeable because it ended up holding us up quite a bit, despite what a lot of the other tech names did, despite how the semis were looking. Apple and Microsoft did their thing. They held up the market relatively pretty much well, and which kept us in this little bit of a chop that we had for most of the day. But we had a nice little breakdown off of the trendline support that ended up happening from yesterday's price action. You found buyers, which was pretty much your prior breakout spot dating back towards the 23rd. You had that nice little ascending triangle action that ended up happening right off your trendline support previously. You ended up retesting and you found buyers basically sitting right at that high 255 level. Buyers stepped in. You had the nice little move to the upside here today. Saw that near 4 or 5 point move to the upside. Do I expect upside? Yes, I do. I'm going to look to see if we get a break over 262 here. We get a break over 262, then I'm potentially looking at some resistance up towards 266 low is what I'm going to look at. And we could potentially be retesting yet again, kind of similar to Tesla. You're going to retest your prior trendline support as a resistance, in which we could make this all the way up towards 268 if we do get a strong gap up here overnight into the data, and maybe we see a little bit of a continuation reflexive bounce into tomorrow morning at the opening bell. All right, so 262 and then 268 is the big two key levels that I'm watching for the upside. Otherwise, if we're looking for the breakdown, I'm watching this under 257, and that's when we're going to potentially take this lower, and we're looking at 250 half is potentially what I'm watching for the downside. All right, so that's another one that's pretty much pretty key on the radar. That relative strength today was just noticeable. So I think it deserves to be on the radar here tomorrow. Another one, this is one that I've pretty much been watching for quite a few days. It kind of left me and it gapped up pretty strong yesterday morning. That was a beautiful little gap up. I had this resistance just sitting there. and I wasn't even able quick enough to kind of get into this one, but that 146 target smacked pretty much dead on. What I'm going to look for this one is a little bit more room to the upside here. You see this little ascending channel action. I'm going to look to pretty much get to the halfway mark of this ascending channel that we have, which would put this right around 142, 142.14. And that's going to be the spot where I'm going to look to see if we reject and we potentially end up breaking this trend line support that we have, in which you're going to end up breaking the overall uptrend. All right. So about 142, 142.14, then we look to break this uptrend, and you're looking at this breaking below 136 and potentially gauging towards gap fill, which I don't expect it to end up filling this particular week, just because that's a pretty far gap to fill. That may you may end up having to go out about a week or two to pretty much play that overall downtrend. Once you end up breaking below that 136, I think you look for about next week expiration and you play towards the gap fill. All right. What's going on, A? So again, this is another one. The thing about Boeing is that just as much as it likes to spike out of the blue, this can dump pretty heavily. So that's why I think if we end up getting that bear scenario, which I at this point I'm assuming a lot of us are kind of just playing out in our head right now, this is going to be one that's going to dump pretty heavy, even though I know it's not a fan favorite. If this dumps and it breaks this trend line support under 136, you're looking at a pretty heavy dump right now on Boeing, and that could pay pretty beautifully. So keep that one on the radar for tomorrow. Other than that, I don't think there's too much else that kind of just stood out to me, if I want to say that for a better term. I kind of glanced at Apple did. We had the broken uptrend. We see the nice little gap. Another one that pretty much found some nice buyers right around that 136 half level. Now you do see I have a little bit of a fib here. I was basically retesting once I saw that we could try to put in that short-term bottom here this morning at the opening bell. I was basically looking for the halfway back from that bottom to the prior high that we had, and we're basically sitting right at the halfway back of that entire little reversal that we had for most of today's action. So 140 is basically your halfway back. Let's see if we pretty much extend this over that 140 half. I would look to see if we take out this the high of the day here, which is sitting over that 140.67, and we could potentially look at this one up towards 142. Close enough to about 142.06 is that mark that I would be watching. Otherwise, that's another one that I would watch for resistance at that 142 mark, and that's potentially another one where I say risk reward, and also depending upon the broader market, that's where I would look to particularly get a U-turn, and we take this right back to the downside. All right, so that's another one kind of just sticking out there as well. I don't think there's anything else that I say that I want to go out of my way to kind of look at. I think we'll see what tomorrow's inflation data does, and I think that's what the market's just kind of setting up for tomorrow. Hence the slow day that we had, and chat being so relatively quiet. I didn't really hear anyone kind of saying that I made 100% on particularly anything today. It was just pretty much a eat premium day. That's literally what you got. I think Jay even dropped the emoji the meme in chat because it just felt like premium was just getting eaten left and right with all the chop that we had today. So let's see what the inflation data does tomorrow. I still anticipate that we get somewhat of a gap up here going into tomorrow into that data as we see SPY trying to rebound here after hours. I'm gonna look to see the gap up. Let's see what kind of continuation we get, or if we get a strong reversal at the opening bell for whatever continuation of this bounce that we get into the open. All right. But other than that, I'll keep it like that. I think tomorrow's going to be a little bit more of a more exciting day, to put it that way. But that inflation data is going to be very critical to see whether we are able to get a continuation on this little V-shaped bottom we had today, or do we end up just seeing a waterfall in which bears are just going to take a standing control of this like they did yesterday. All right. But I'll leave it at that. Kind of leave it a little bit short and sweet here for today. Let's see what inflation data has for us tomorrow. I'll see. I'll probably likely be on for the first hour live tomorrow for you guys. But other than that, I'll leave it at a wrap there. Hope you guys had a great day. Let's make tomorrow better. Close out the week pretty strong.